We'll jump into that in just a moment, but before that, I'll just go through a few bits of content with you that we're going to cover today. Of course, Teacher Joel's experience in China we'll go through first of all, before taking a bit of a look at the history of education in China. We'll then take a look at in-class challenges, teacher expectations, and cultural awareness in the workplace. Throughout all of this, we'll have a particular emphasis on looking at both the nature of working in a private language centre and a public school quite separately. So Teacher Joel will go through a few more bits of the nitty-gritty of working in a private language centre, and I will go a bit more in depth later on in the presentation about our public school roles. So, Joel, it'd be great to learn a little bit from you, first of all, about your experience in China, in the beautiful city of Chongqing that you can see just here. Did you ever have much of a chance to go and visit this area? I can't remember for the life of me what it's called, that beautiful ancient area along the Yangtze River. Do you remember what that's called, Joel?
I cannot remember because several locals told me different names for it because it's got a few colloquial names, but you must visit it if you're in Chongqing at night time because it's so beautiful. One thing I will say about it though is the elevators are really complicated because it's about 6 stories. One elevator will take you to the 3rd floor, then you need to get an elevator to go to the 4th, then the 6th, then you need to come down one. But definitely worth a visit, really beautiful.
Oh, amazing. What's Chongqing like as a city? How would you describe it in just a few words?
Humid, mountainous, so mountainous, that's definitely a word. And a bit chaotic. It's a loud city, a loud city.
Ah, amazing, amazing. I sometimes hear people say that Chongqing is a bit like a northern Chinese city, but sort of in the southwest. It's sort of a bit livelier. It's a bit more sort of like hot-tempered, but in like quite a good way. Like something I heard someone say in Chongqing, people love spicy food and people have like spicy attitudes. It's sort of like quite lively place. It's pretty cool in that way, I think, right?
Yeah, it's really easy to make friends there, especially compared to other cities in the southwest. Everyone's really kind of rambunctious and loud and speaks to you. Everyone's there the men are really manly, the women are really sort of open and forceful. Yeah, it's a really kind of bold city, a lot more like you would expect in the north, right?
Amazing, amazing. And Joel, you worked in a private language centre, didn't you? Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was that like arriving in the first day? Can you tell us what your centre looked like, what that experience was like?
So it was quite difficult to find it on the first day because loads of Chinese streets, there'll be supermarkets along the bottom and then loads of businesses on the first floor. So my language centre was on the first floor. You went up some stairs and it was basically a long kind of row of offices with maybe 10 or so classrooms and a small station for teachers. The first day, I'll be honest, I was expecting a little bit more of a welcome and it was a bit more kind of like, oh, you're here, right, get on with the job then. So I kind of had to introduce myself to all the teachers, get myself set up. Lots of staring from teachers and kids, because especially in Chongqing, nobody had ever seen a foreigner. So there were lots of staring, lots of people coming up and asking me questions. But yeah, it was a great experience, a little bit overwhelming on the first day, but my manager really left me alone, took me to my hotel afterwards and just take 2 or 3 days to yourself to kind of get settled in.
Excellent, excellent. And what was it like teaching your first class in a private language centre in China? Can you describe what that looked like?
There's a little bit more pressure on you, I think, teaching your first class at a private language centre, because at the centre I was at, parents were allowed to watch, and because their kids hadn't been taught by a foreigner before, all of the walls to my classroom were glass, and I just had maybe 10 or so Chongqing grandmas all up against the window kind of staring in at me. Thankfully, they were all really kind of welcoming and encouraging. They were just happy to have me there. And also bear in mind, none of them spoke English, so they couldn't understand what I was teaching the kids. So I had 10 or so kids who were all incredibly excited, all of these parents outside, and my manager at the window. But I got a little bit of advice at the end of it, and for the most part, it went really, really well.
Excellent, excellent. And did you have any problem kids? Did you ever have any students that you struggled with a little bit in there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my first class were all 6-year-olds, and there was one who would always tell me his name was Spider-Man, so I just had to run with that. His name got put on the wall as Spider-Man, and keeping him glued to the chair was just impossible, right? But funnily enough, none of the kind of scorn surrounding that got directed towards me. The parents were angry with the parent of that child. So I think people are understanding that if there's a really problematic child, it's not really your fault. If you're doing your best to control them, right? You don't have to sweat about it too much. And he was a problem throughout. But the majority of the kids responded pretty well to me, actually. So yeah, not too bad.
What was the sort of thing that you had to teach in your centre? Did you have sort of like a plug and play type curriculum that was all set up for you and ready to go for each of the students? Was there a lot of diversification? Did you have to do much planning yourself? How did that work at your centre?
Absolutely. So there were kind of three books that we taught from, one for little kids, one for intermediate, and one for older kids. Now, we were told that the lesson planning would be done for us. That wasn't necessarily the case. We had the textbook and then had to go from there and kind of plan a lesson off of it. So it wasn't a tremendous amount of work doing that. But I would say trying to navigate the Chinese computers where all of the folders were in Chinese was a bit of a struggle to begin with. So if you're watching and you end up in that situation, ask for help. Ask for help, because somebody in the centre will be willing to help you with that. And ask foreign teachers as well. Foreign teachers were so much help to me in planning my first few lessons out there. I had the textbook, but the textbook will only get you so far.
Excellent. And speaking of foreign teachers, what was it like in terms of foreign teacher engagement at your centre? How many were there? Were they friendly? What sort of people were they?
So this was the big shock. I was told that there would be several foreign teachers at my campus. But when I first went there, they took me to the main campus to see what I was like. And I think they thought, okay, you know what you're doing. So I got sent to a campus that had no foreign teachers. So all eyes on me. But the majority of campuses had 3 or so teachers. Generally, it was kind of mixed nationality, somebody from Canada, somebody from the UK, and somebody from America. And even though I was the only person there, as soon as I went, kind of the expat community was so welcoming. Got put into several WeChat groups. And if I need anything at all, resources, help, a shoulder to cry on, I could send a message out, right? And somebody would message me instantly. So I was a bit isolated in the north. That was very, very unusual. I was the only person I know that was by myself. But I wasn't completely by myself because everyone else was just so welcoming.
Awesome. What sort of class sizes did you have? How many students would you have in your class? Was it like a pretty wide range?
They really varied. So the centre had kind of classrooms in the middle of the city, and those classes were more expensive, so they'd have 5 or 6 children. Whereas because I was in the very north of Chongqing, where people were slightly less affluent, the classes were cheaper, which meant I had larger class sizes. So I had 10 to 12 students mainly in my classes, but I also had a few VIP classes, which were 1 or 2 students. I'd say 8 out of 10 classes were 10 to 12 students, and then a few of them were kind of these 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 classes as well.
Okay, cool, excellent. Do you think there are any particular challenges or difficulties that are most applicable to a private language centre, to a training centre, that you won't get at a normal school? Is there anything that sort of comes to your mind, like any unique problems that you might get there?
Just speaking to people that worked in my language centre and others, they can try and be a bit funny with the contract. So I was told I'd have a translator at all times. That wasn't the case. So you've got to really think on your feet when it comes to giving instructions to kids, managing behaviour, especially if they don't have much English. A private language centre can also be a little bit different schedule-wise to a school. A school, you're obviously working Monday to Friday, whereas I worked 3 evenings Monday to Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday was all day. So it was a lot more kind of focused, right? So you've got a really different schedule. I'd say that's the main kind of thing to get used to, was having 2 really exhausting days, Saturday and Sunday, and then a really relaxing Monday to Friday. But after a month or so, I think I really got into the swing of that.
Definitely. There's a really good point that you make there about things just changing and needing to go with the flow, even when it can be frustrating at times. I remember when I worked in a private language centre years ago, the TA who was my translator, Although she was supposed to stick with me in my classes, would sometimes disappear, would have an urgent thing they needed to deal with, and you just need to react and think on your feet and be ready and quick to adapt. I know you're definitely a person like that, and that's absolutely what you need to be in China, isn't it, Joel? You've got to be ready to change, ready to adapt, ready to be flexible. What would be your top tip for anyone heading out to China who's going to be working in a private language centre, Joel?
Like you said, I think flexibility is the key. But one thing that really helped me was Chinese people can be quite kind of short, and it doesn't mean they don't think you're doing a good job. It doesn't mean they don't like you. It's just how they communicate. So be flexible, but also don't sweat the small stuff too much. Because if you take every small criticism or every small kind of piece of advice they give you, you're going to really get yourself down in the dumps. If you ever feel yourself getting like that, talk to foreign teachers who have been there longer than you, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's everyone's first experience in the first month or two, right? So allow yourself to be flexible, and also just allow yourself to make a few mistakes and to adjust in the first month or two. And ask for advice when you need it.
Definitely. That's really good advice. And of course, asking the right foreign teachers as well, in my opinion, is pretty important. There's a difference between asking the super friendly head of your school who is always willing to help and is super enthusiastic, and asking the drunk, bored old teacher down the pub who's been there for 20 years and just complains about China. When you go ask that guy, because there's that guy in every city in China about teaching, you're never going to get a good answer. It's always the right one.
Every private language centre has somebody that hates China for some reason, and everyone just sort of knows to steer clear of them, right? Never ask that guy. And you'll know in the first 2 weeks who that guy is. Like you said, it's always somebody who's been there really long, is really curmudgeonly. Just ask the people that kind of present themselves as being friendly, enthusiastic, are really kind of favoured by the company.
For sure. What did you learn about yourself working in a private language centre in China, Joel?
This is going to sound really sentimental, but I learned that I'm a lot more resilient than I thought I was, right? You think university here, you get given a lot, and then you go to China and all of a sudden you get given responsibility, you're looking after these kids by yourself. And the first month was probably the most exciting, but also the most daunting month of my life. And when I came out of it, I was just like, wow, I cannot believe I endured that, right? And I annoyed all of my friends back in the UK by telling them about this, right? I think I talked their ears off, but I really found that like, wow, I can really take on responsibilities. I can go and explore a city by myself. As cheesy as it is, but it just was like a massive step forward for me in my life.
Definitely. And when you actually get through to some of your kids that you have in classes when it's private language centres, you're that much closer to them, aren't you, Joel? You're that much sort of better connected than working with 40 to 60 children where you're maybe a bit less close. When you actually make like a real connection, when you achieve something, when you get them to read that book fully for the first time perfectly, when you get them to hold that conversation or express their opinion on something, it can really be that bit more special. Did you ever have any instances like that?
I think one of the most heartwarming things is at a private language centre, often if you're living close to it, you'll also live in the same neighbourhood as some of your students. And about kind of 2 months in, if ever I went to the supermarket or walked down the street, I had one instance where I was walking to work and I heard somebody shouting my name, and there was this like 5-year-old kid poking his head out the window shouting Teacher Joel at me. That was the best thing, to really feel like I was building up a rapport and these kind of like lovely relationships with these kids. And they all got so excited when they were taught by me versus by a Chinese teacher, right? Because they kind of bragged to all of their friends about being taught by a foreigner, would come up and say hello. One of them wanted to help me in the supermarket, which was really sweet. He was like 7 years old and was there helping me like order things. So yeah, that was really sweet.
Awesome. Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. Thanks so much for joining us, Joel. That's really, really useful to get to know more about your experience, and really helpful and great for sharing. If anyone has any questions that they want to put to Joel, any questions that Joel can answer, do please just drop us a message to info@opportunity-china.com, and we'll pass that on to Joel to answer any questions that you might have or put you in touch. But thank you so much for joining us, Joel. I hope you have a lovely rest of the evening. And we'll speak with you again very soon.
Cheers, thank you, Will, and good luck to everyone that's going over to China. Best of luck with it.
Thank you so much, Joel. Take care. Bye-bye. Excellent. Thank you very much once again to Joel there. Now, let's crack on and take a look at education in China itself. We'll begin with a brief overview where we're going to cover the history, contemporary education in China, and learn a little bit about how and why China is as it is today in an educational sense. First of all, the history of education in China. As many of you will know, China has 5,000 years of continuous civilization, the world's longest continuous civilization in history. And by continuous civilization, what we generally mean by that, or generally understand to mean by that, is a form of history or a form of culture that has continued in some way or another consistently over 5,000 years, unbroken, undisturbed, uninfiltrated and changed in its entirety. There is some sense of familiarity and continuity between the China of 5,000 years ago and the China of today. Now that is an astounding fact when you think about it. That is something that is really quite incredible. And this is something that goes a long way to explaining many Chinese attitudes that persist today with relation to education in the country. One of the most educationally dedicated cultures that exists in the world exists in China. And a lot of this has to do with Confucianist thinking, which places a huge emphasis on education, morality, self-cultivation, respect, hierarchy, and authority. And it creates a very different type of environment for learning than in the West. In the West, in the classroom, teachers will often engage with students, asking them their opinions, having more of a free-form lesson style. Students will often sit in square tables facing one another for discussion. In China, that authority and hierarchy exists in a front-facing environment. Students will sit back straight, heads up, eyes forward, looking, listening, concentrating, consuming all of the knowledge that comes out, and teachers are expected to be depositories of knowledge for their students, as opposed to facilitators of exchange. Now, this is a very different concept to what we have in the West, and it goes a long way to explaining the society and function that exists in China today. Make sure that you always keep an open mind about these things. Don't prejudge with Western morality or Western norms what is right or wrong, and certainly don't try to change or insist on anything being different in the country. What about education in the 20th century in China? Well, this is a very, very strong and important definition of how China's education system has changed. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was formed, or China as we know it today in its current form. During this time, the Communist government, the Communist Party of China, generally viewed creative subjects and arts as being broadly wasteful and representative of a kind of educational, intellectual bourgeois elite, and were, for the most part, done away with, in some ways, quite violently and aggressively. There's an emphasis that's placed on precise skill learning. Many universities in China still carry names such as aeronautical universities, mechanical engineering universities, whilst these universities also offer arts courses. These are remnants of this very precise sense of skill learning that existed in China during these earlier communist years. And during the Cultural Revolution, formal education in any recognisable sense was essentially stopped until 1979, from the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. The Gaokao, China's main exam, most general academic learning ceased, and many people had a pent-up desire for education, to bring that education back, to give their students a better sense. And from 1979 and reform and opening up, there was a series of large, well thought out and well funded schemes to help develop the education system into one of the world beating education systems that exist today, and something that they are rightfully very proud of. The education system also seeks to create an international and global facing China, a China that is ready to work with the rest of the world, a China that is ready to open up and to engage with the rest of the world on their own terms, of course, not dictated to by anyone else. There's also been a growth in the middle class and return to investing in traditional Chinese values, including those ideals of Confucianism that we spoke about earlier, that places the emphasis on education, that places all of those Confucianist values at the very centre of society. Now, because China is such a large country, because China is a country that is developing economically so fast and changing socially so rapidly, there is a huge amount of competition that exists, with parents wanting to place more of an emphasis on their children, to learn new skills, to develop, to get better, faster. There has been a commercialization and monetization of education that has begun to creep in, particularly over the last 20 to 25 years in China. Now, this has been a real mixed bag. On the one hand, it has facilitated a lot of international exchange. Many private language centre training schools have opened where foreign teachers have been able to come into China to learn about the country and to teach children. This soft power exchange has been really welcomed and really strong. But on the other hand, the increase in commercialisation of education in subjects, in core Chinese subjects such as English, maths and science, has also led to increased competition among parents, increased stress in children, and has led to what many of you might have seen in the news recently, which are the 2021 education reforms. Now, at present, we don't know entirely what this will mean. However, it's worth noting that all of our partners, both private language centres and public schools, are still recruiting. There is no stop and no gap, no plug on foreign teachers being able to enter other than the current COVID regulations. So anything that you might have read online, don't worry about that for the moment. At Opportunity China, we deal only in facts, and until we get all the facts, we can safely say, having spoken with our colleagues in China, that there is nothing to worry about at the moment with relation to these educational reforms changing your situation. So, what about English in China? Well, English in China is a core subject in the Chinese curriculum. Introduced as a core subject in 2001, alongside Mandarin Chinese or Putonghua and mathematics, it forms a triangle of the most important subjects that all Chinese students must learn. Students also have the option of learning either science-based subjects or political and arts-based subjects once they reach the end of middle school. There are currently 300 million English language learners in China. Now, think about that in the context of the United Kingdom. That is around 5 times the population of the United Kingdom are currently learning English in China. And that's not just the children, that's also adults as well, students as old as 90 to 100. In 2016, the ASEAN nations adopted English as the official language of the group of countries. The ASEAN nations being the association of Southeast Asian nations, which China is one of their largest trade partners, alongside the EU having English as an official language, alongside the UN having the English as an official language. This really has solidified how important English is as China's primary language of communication as it seeks to embolden its image on the world stage. However, large class sizes in the country from an early age mean that rote learning is still prevalent. Students are able to learn a lot of vocabulary, they're able to learn a lot of the science behind grammar structures and things like that, but there are intrinsic failures that mean that communication in an oral English sense, like a casual conversation, have really fallen by the wayside. And this has been a particular problem due to the enormous demand that has emerged for outward mobility, with students looking to travel abroad to study in countries like the UK and Australia increasingly. Now, we're going to really ride through some of these quite quickly. So if you have any questions, please do pop them over to info@opportunity-china.com and we'll seek to answer those. What about being in school in China and the challenges within Chinese schools? Well, let's take a look first of all at the types of schools that exist in China predominantly. We've got public schools, private language or training centres as they're colloquially known, universities and international or bilingual schools. Now, as recent graduates, your options will be limited to these top two, public schools and private language/training centres. Public schools are the equivalent of state schools in the UK. They are government-funded schools where students who live in the local catchment areas will attend and study their 3 core subjects as well as their elective subjects. They go from the age of 6 to 18, beginning with a primary school from 6 to 12, a middle school 12 to 16, and a high school 16 to 18. They take 2 main exams throughout this time. The first is the Zhongkao, which they take in middle school, which determines which high school they're going to be able to get into. And finally, their Gaokao, which is the university entrance examination in China that determines which university they will be able to apply to. This is known as the most competitive and hardest examination in the entire world. Private language and training centres are predominantly aimed at students between the ages now of 6 to 12 who are looking to improve conversational English in order to give them a boost later in life. There is going to be some reform that will happen to some of these courses, and we'll of course be keeping an eye on this and speaking with our partners about this. But for the time being, in private language centres, students will generally learn during the weekdays and the evenings and at the weekends. So, starting out as a teacher in China, what can you expect? Well, first of all, you can expect an introduction to your school, an introduction to your training centre, meeting other teachers and the head teacher or the head teacher or foreign manager that'll be there, getting to know the staff rooms, engaging in meetings. Learning about professionalism and the hierarchy that exists is also something very important, as well as, of course, in meeting your class for the first time. Now, Joel was really helpful for setting the scene as to what you can expect at training centres, so I'll just very briefly fire through this. You can generally expect to teach in a small class between 1 and 15 students. You usually have a plug-and-play curriculum, a book that's generally a foreign developed curriculum that's really easy to teach. Those of you for the first time teaching can find that. It's a useful type of school to go into for a first job. Now, previously you would be working at the weekends and evenings. However, new policy may mean that weekends are no longer able to be worked on, and there may be some rejigging that we can expect to happen to the curriculums of training centres. There may be cooperation with schools to allow students to go in early during the weekdays, but this is something that we'll be keeping a close eye on over the next few months. It's easy to catch on and begin working at these schools, but you also have targets that you'll work to as well. So expect to do things such as demo classes, demonstration classes for students who are interested in signing up to a course. There are new regulations, of course, that are coming in, which may mean that there is a change from explicitly doing English language courses to doing courses in things such as culture and drama in the English language. So once again, these are things to keep an eye out for and things that we will continually update you on throughout the process. What are the challenges in these classrooms? Well, first of all, there's excitement, sometimes a little bit too much. As Joel mentioned earlier, some of these students certainly aren't used to seeing foreign faces, and definitely not over the last 18 months. Among younger years, there can be a struggle to distinguish work and play active lessons in active lessons. So when you are going to be doing out of hours training centre teaching, students might find it difficult to distinguish between your class and an after-school club where they're just simply going to be going and having fun and having a laugh. And this can be a really big issue at times when working with students. Then, of course, there is shyness and isolation that can exist. Some students are just naturally quite shy, quite nervous. You've got to try to bring it out of their shell. And there can be wildly varying expectations from parents as to what they are expecting their students to achieve and what they're expecting their students to do. Bringing students out of hiding can be a particularly tough ask. Getting to know your students, feeling confident with them is always a key to doing this, which is why strong, bold and loud characters are always needed. Now, of course, if you're at a private language centre, you have the additional worry of parents. You'll often have to speak to parents after each lesson. Parents, however, will rarely blame the teacher in China. They will usually blame the student. It can leave you feeling a little bit guilty sometimes after you have had a lesson with students if you say a student's not done quite so well. So it's always worth lightening a blow if you're criticising a student's behaviour in particular. There can also sometimes be contradictory or confusing requirements that come from parents. It's always best to be very direct about what you need and what you want with your students and what you're hoping for them to achieve. But also remember to listen to their wants and their whims. And remember that you don't always necessarily know best. Now, let's take a look at our public schools. So what does the structure of a day at a public school look like? Well, school will usually begin between 7:40 and 8 a.m. and every Monday there'll be a flag raising ceremony and the national anthem. Schools usually finish around 5 p.m. However, some schools will have extracurricular activities. If you work in a primary or middle school, you will have a 2-hour lunch period in the middle of the day. And usually you won't be expected to be in school outside of your lesson hours, which make things quite flexible. It's really vital that if you're working in a public school in China, you make an effort to make friends. Chinese colleagues will often be very welcoming and friendly to you, but they may also be quite direct in terms of putting you in at a bit of a deep end. So it's really important to start off on the right foot. Remember what we spoke about yesterday, about bringing gifts, about bringing something special, and remember to show respect to authority as well. We were speaking earlier about Confucianism and those values. Those values definitely still exist in education. Remember that the person at the top of the totem pole is often the person who knows best. Don't talk down to, don't condescend. Offer your ideas, offer criticism, offer alternative notions, but do so respectfully and try to do so privately as well. Remember, China is a face society, and sometimes what may feel like in Britain a normal criticism or a normal action that you might take may be considered very rude or potentially offensive in China if it's done in public in front of other people. Another thing that's super important when you're working in a public school that's a bit of a difference to a private school is picking your own songs and flavours for your classes. Making sure that you add your own ideas, making sure that you add your own taste to the classes that you're going to be doing whilst you're in the country. So this can mean coming up with a few different lesson plans for your students, a few different games and activities that you can find online. We'll give you a lot of advice. There's a lot of great guidance on the Teach China, on the Opportunity China website when it comes to this. Make sure that you give yourself tasks and treats that are unique to yourself as well. So having little cardboard cutouts of funny animals and stars when you have your students all in a line and you're grading them or ranking them. Also bring your own props. Make it related to you. Make it personal. Make it something that's a little bit special. And remember that your job is going to be the vibrant, fun, smiley, happy teacher. So make sure that you prepare yourself for that. What your job to do is not to stand up in front of the class and be incredibly strict. That's what their Chinese teachers are going to be there for. Your job is to engage them. Your job is to get them talking. Your job is to get them thinking more and more. And what's really, really special about your job that's very unique compared to other teachers' jobs is the environment that your class is going to be set in. Your class is going to be all English. Outside of class, what are your expectations? Well, of course, you're going to be expected to plan your lessons. Unlike in private language centres, you're not necessarily going to have a plug-and-play curriculum. You will have assistance from other teachers and from your agencies who will give you lesson plans and ideas, but it is your responsibility to change these, create new items, and come up with your own materials for your classes during this. Many schools are very flexible about in-school hours for foreign teachers, but do be mindful when you're working in the classroom that Chinese teachers won't have the same privileges as you. So do be sensitive to that. Now, when it comes to additional activities, there will be a level of expectation that you engage in these, especially things such as school showcases. This could well become a big part of your job, preparing students to sing a song in English, to act a play out in English, to do an activity in English that will be applauded and seen as being wonderful and special by parents. You'll almost be certain to have to participate in these showcases as well. There's no alternative to it. If you're someone who's super shy, who doesn't want to do something like that, then this definitely isn't the place for you. It's always good humoured, but it can sometimes feel a little intimidating at first. But once you do your first one, you'll realise how easy it is from that point onwards. Now, when it comes to teaching at a public school, a major problem can be disruption. You're going to be in a class of 40 to 60 students at times. Many of these are going to be young students doing energetic activities for the first time. So it's important to make sure that you have simple calls and commands to get your students to calm down. On our training day, we'll go through some of these in a lot more detail to help you engage and be able to practice actually teaching in a public school setting. It's always important to remember the structure of your classes. Remember what you're going to be doing and when. Remember what comes after next. And remember to set out clear rules and expectations from your first lesson with your students. Your students are very used to having it spelled out exactly to them what their expectations are and what the rules are. And they will obey them. They'll be used to obeying expectations. They'll be used to meeting expectations and obeying rules. But it is your responsibility to make it clear to them in the first instance and to follow through with it. Now, another issue can be short notice demands, and this is very much part and parcel of living and working in China. As Joel mentioned earlier, you've got to be ready to be flexible, you've got to be ready to be called in to do or cover a lesson at the last minute. Don't worry about being underprepared if that is the case. You've just got to give it your best shot. You've just got to try as much as you can. You've got to put on a show sometimes. You'll never be asked to do something that actually interrupts with your primary job. You'll always be given time to be able to plan that. But there may be additional things that come up in your hours, in your office hours that you might have that you'll be expected to do. And trust me, you will be rewarded for stepping up to these challenges. You'll be rewarded with trips out, you'll be rewarded with favour from those higher up in the hierarchy, and it will shine down well on you and produce a good face for you if you do step up to these challenges. And then, of course, there are students who have behavioural problems. It's always important to ensure that naughty children, children who are loud, children who will cause problems in your class are sat closest to you and apart from one another. I use the term naughty children very pointedly because that is what the Chinese teachers will tell you. There are no politically correct sensitivities that exist in China when it comes to describing students who are disruptive in classes. Like there are in Britain, the majority of teachers will simply say that child is a naughty child and they need to be moved closer to you. Again, remember, you are not coming to China to change China. You are coming to China to work in China and to do your best job. So do not always necessarily impart any cultural or societal learnings that you have into situations like that. It often won't go down particularly well. Often Chinese teachers will put them at the back. Due to the nature of your lessons, this will actually make them more disruptive. So make sure that you always speak with colleagues about this, not criticize them, not tell them how to do their job, but take a look at moving them in order to be able to actually engage in the class in a meaningful way. Once again, any questions that you might have, please do pop those over to info@opportunity-china.com and we'll shoot straight back to you with that. So, what are the expectations that are placed on foreign teachers in China? Why are we here? We're there to lift the standard of English to keep up with academic progress that's happening in other areas in China. China is rapidly developing, both in terms of its society, its economy, but also its education system. However, there is still a shortfall in practical communication skills that exist among Chinese students. And the older generation, it's really important to improve confidence in grammar and communication skills because of that, with younger generations looking to get a strong native speaking foundation to their education to really set them off in the right direction so that the issue currently that exists of having a lower level of practical communication skills among students in China is no longer there. And with that come a level of comes a level of expectation when it comes to what your personality is going to be like. They're looking for engaging, high energy, fun students, fun teachers. You could be the most qualified, most experienced teacher in the world, but if at your school matching you're not smiling, you're not engaging, you're not fun, then they're simply not going to want you. You've got to be able to hold the attention of an individual and a large group at the same time. You've got to be someone who is engaging. You've got to be someone who's interesting. You've got to be someone who's got really good points to make. You've got to be able to accurately work with teaching materials for students. You've got to be able to be literate in terms of taking an object and creating a learning environment from that object, creating something that will stick with students for the rest of their life. And of course, you've got to be able to display patience and care with your students. You've got to be able to display an amount of empathy, an amount of understanding for them. And of course, there are practical expectations as well. Your lessons need to be planned well in advance and checked with colleagues. You've got to ensure that student progress is logged and information on individual students is suitably organised. As we've mentioned time and time again, you've got to be ready to adapt to last-minute changes. New classes, covering classes if you're in a public school, having demo classes at the last minute if you're in a private language or training centre. And you've got to be ready to put the interests of the school and workplace harmony as a priority. Once again, any questions that anybody has, pop those over to info@opportunity-china.com. Then, of course, there is the issue of cultural awareness at work and workplace etiquette. This is directly associated with cross-cultural understanding. Flexibility and adaptability are always admired. Being polite, being kind, watching what other teachers around you are doing when it comes to their relations with their colleagues, and looking to engage in that too, looking to get off on the right foot by gift giving. China is less self-focused and more group-focused than the West. Sitting there and moaning and complaining about your job and about your day isn't something that's quite so commonly done in China. In a professional setting, they may go home and moan to their husband, moan to their wife, moan to their mum, dad and friends about it. But among colleagues, it's actually something that isn't quite so commonly done. And again, kind of goes back to those Confucianist values. So be careful about what you say in front of your Chinese colleagues when it comes to that. And remember that hierarchy and authority is incredibly important. There's not a flat management structure that exists in China. Although it can be nice to have banter and fun with your bosses and with your line managers in the UK, there's a bit more of a formal attitude when it comes to those relationships in China. Remember where people stand. Remember about giving face and saving face. We'll go into how to do that in tomorrow's session. And remember that you are in a different country with a very different type of social system. Issues do need to be dealt with sensitively in that sense as well. It's always better to raise any issues that you have directly with the concerned partner in private, as opposed to in front of anybody else. Relationships at work are, of course, key. Maintaining a good relationship with your boss, maintaining a good relationship with your colleagues, maintaining a friendly relationship with absolutely everyone that you come with, and also keeping the respect of your students is incredibly important. So in a practical sense, resolving issues is very important when working as a teacher in China. Ensure discretion and privacy. Be careful not to appear confrontational, be friendly. Issue a problem that you have with a smile. They'll know what it means. Always remain respectful and diplomatic. Do a sandwich. Say that there's something you really enjoy first before a complaint and then something you really enjoy at the end. And always do your research before raising a complaint. It might be the fact that a simple misunderstanding has happened, and these misunderstandings can grow and become worse. Retain relationships and ensure that face is saved from all sides. What you'll often find is when you have a complaint to make or when you have an issue, the person who is receiving the issue will also be very complimentary to you back. Make sure that you repay that in kind. Don't try to get above anyone. Don't try to put yourself in any sort of position where you're above anyone else, even if you feel you've been wronged, even if you feel that you are a party that has had an issue. Don't try to turn the tables. Don't try to act in any way vindictive. It's super important to remember that. So, if anyone has any final questions, once again, please do pop those to info@opportunity-china.com and we'll be more than happy to get straight back to you. Otherwise, it's been lovely